the sound systems were our radios. They were our messengers. They brought news of what was fresh in reggae. I told Dennis, you know what the new statement in dance is? What? Lovers rock. And he went, yeah, I like that. People thought it was piracy, and I was going, I'm not pirating the tune. I'm just, showing my skills about how to borrow.
I'm Adrian Sykes, and this is Union Black, an online multi-format content series across YouTube and Google Arts and Culture, featuring a curated collection of videos, audio documentaries, podcasts, stories, and photographs. Each series takes us on a journey celebrating the contributions of Black British music artists, creatives, professionals, and scenes. Told by the Black British music community, these stories will demonstrate the undeniable influence and impact of Black British music and culture in the UK and beyond. Go check out all the Union Black content on Google Arts and Culture at goo.gle/Union Black. The Black British Producers Behind Global Album series is a piece of 4 visualised podcasts that will spotlight a cross-generation of Black British music producers who've had international impact. Today on this episode of Black British Producers Behind Global Albums, I'm joined by the legend that is Dennis Bovell, MBE, producer of, amongst others, the Thompson Twins, the pop group Iroy, Bananarama, the Slits, the incredible Linton Kwesi Johnson, Boy George, Joss Stone, Orange Juice, his own incredible dub albums. And if it wasn't enough to produce those great albums, this is a man who's spawned an entire genre that speaks of Britishness, and that is lovers rock.
So I became known for being able to achieve the reggae sound. And I think that's due to the fact that in 1969, a friend of mine, Owen Kerr, he came to me and said, look, my cousin has got married with a lad from Kensal Rise, and he's coming to live in Battersea. And him and his brother are thinking about putting together a sound system. And we heard that you've been making dub plates at school, so let me hear these dub plates, right? What you've been making. And after playing him these dub plates, he went, right, I want them all. I was like, you want them all? He goes, yeah. Have you got a DJ for the sound? He went, no. I said, well, that would be me.
That's me, yeah.
So he went, okay, come, you bring your dub plates, you're part of the sound, we've got the amplification, blah, blah, blah. And we started off like that. And the name of the sound is Sufferer. A lot of people used to say, why is the sound called Sufferer? Because we are the sound system of the sufferers, right? We are all sufferers, whether you like it or not, or whether you know it or not. And we are the mighty sufferers entertaining, just sufferers hi-fi, And we started playing around Battersea, Lansdowne Road in Stockwell, and then we got offered to be the resident sound at the Metro in Ladbroke Grove, St Luke's Road, Ladbroke Grove.
Okay. I know St. Luke's.
Now, the Metro had been recently closed down because of an affray with when Duke Vin was the resident sound. And Trevor Bow had received a prison sentence. And then they were seeking to reignite the Metro, and they wanted Sufferer sound. Now, you come from North, you stay in the North, you don't come in the South and run up your mouth, right? You know what I'm saying? So, in fact, the Big Four frequently came to a place called Poultney Hall on Lavender Hill in Wandsworth to battle it out.
You should tell people who the Big Four were, for those that don't know.
The Big Four were Sir Coxon, Jewel Creed, Count Shelley, and Neville the Enchanter.
So, for those that don't understand as well, tell people how important the sound systems were for the culture and the people at that particular point in time.
The sound systems were our radios. They were our messengers. They brought news of what was fresh in reggae, right? they brought news of what the next thing is going to be. You know, some records that they played were not yet readily available. You'd have to wait until the record release, and then if you don't even know the tune, the name of the tune, you have to sing the tune to the shopkeeper. You know what I mean? And it's one of my tunes. I go, you don't have to know the catalog number. Just sing the song to the shopkeeper, mix it. You know? And that was all very true. Now, because I'd been listening to sound systems in big open spaces, I knew what the recipe was for the bass to be reproduced at that level, for the drums, to the whole reggae. So I made sounds that I could, you know, see being reproduced. And also you had to be careful about the amount of the frequencies, because I'd been learning about disc cutting. And cutting vinyl discs is a specialty. I mean, there are certain frequencies that sound all right now on digital and all that, but back in the day, you wouldn't have been able to put those frequencies on that vinyl, on that plastic, you know, because the treble will make the needle jump off, and the bass, if you put it will make the needle go because it would create what's called a square wave instead of a sine wave. And I learned all about, you know, the waves and all that. In fact, my teacher was a man called John Hassel, who had Hassel's recordings. He was a Jewish man that lived in Barnes. And he lived on a road called Nassau Road. One of the other residents of Nassau Road was David Rodigan. And that was before he was a DJ. That was while he was an actor at the Royal Court in Sloane Square. So I knew David before he was a DJ, man. And Johnny Hassel, right, he did outside recordings. And some of the recordings that he did was for a company called Sweet Folk Hall. And Sweet Folk Hall was
love that play on words.
Yeah.
Think about it.
And the biggest star on Sweet Folk Hall was Jasper Carrott. Before he was a comedian.
Before he was Jasper Carrott.
Jasper Carrott, he was a singer, you know. Yeah. And I worked with Hassel was my teacher. So I kind of introduced other sound systems to Hassel's cutting machine that he had in his living room. And he was inexpensive. It was not like going uptown or going to Wembley.
So he'd been a man cutting your dubs.
Listen,
for you.
I regretted having told Shaka and Cox and them man there, because then they booked all the time and I couldn't get in there. And in fact, David Rodigan wrote in his book, he wrote that one day he'd been in there cutting, and suddenly I barged in and said, David, give us a minute. I've got this tune that I need to make a dub plate of. And he kind of graciously went, yeah, go on then. And I put the tune on, and he remembers that the tune was Silly Games.
We're coming there, but we have to get this on the journey to get there, because
there was lots of things before Silly Games. Yeah. In fact, the first lovers rock singer that I experimented with was a singer called Marie Pierre.
Okay.
And she was my brother-in-law's wife, so she was family, and she could sing. You know, and so her and I struck a relationship of writing songs together, and occasionally that afforded me to explore my musicality and my multiple musicianship.
So what were you playing that time? You obviously playing your guitar, you're playing bass.
I'm playing drums, I'm playing keyboards, right, okay. I'm playing a lot.
So you're a one-man band, essentially.
Correct.
Right now.
That's how Lloydie Coxon says to me, and we were talking about meeting as Coxon and Sufferer.
Right.
Lloydie said to me, would you think I'm going to come and gamble my name, Sir Coxon, that I've been building for all these years, with you in a dance for £100? It's better we don't meet, right? So I was going, but we should join forces in the recording studio. I've got an idea, and you're going to help me pull it through. And I was going, then. His idea was to do a reggae version of the song that he used to sign on his sound system with religiously. With anyone who ever heard Coxon's sound and was there from the beginning, as soon as all those boxes were working and functioning, he would play Robert Parker's version of Caught You in a Lie. He was famous for playing that song. In fact, he was one of the only sounds that played that, right? Because it's very little known, and it was like a dub plate. You know, you had to know where that record came from and who sang it, you know. And Lloydie Coxon hammered that song to death. So when he'd been having a competition, because by this time he had become the resident sound at the Four Aces in Dalston.
Yep, one of the great black clubs ever in the UK.
Absolutely. And he wanted to do a reggae version, so said, all right then. And he used to call me Doctor Who. He said, Doctor Who. Come, you know, Matumbi. Yeah. And so went into the studio with the drummer of Matumbi, Houghton Jones, and the vocalist of Matumbi, Bevan Fagan, and myself, who played guitar. And while we were there recording this Caught You in a Lie reggae version, I had the idea to start it off like a false start, because that was in the time when a lot of reggae began with an intro that wasn't the tune.
Yeah. So
I thought about sharking on Caught You in a Lie, but changing the intro from what it was as a saxophone thing going ba ba da ba 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 da ba ba da ba 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 da, right, a saxophone thing. I thought that's a bit dreary, and so while we were recording it, I took the bass line from a famous Lee Perry production, okay, called Curly Locks. Right,
one of the boss
at
reggae
that time
tunes
biggest
all time.
reggae tune, and the bass line went do 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 ba wap 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 do do do, right, and I chose that part of the song to open Caught You in a Lie, but instead of playing and all that, I came with the idea to use a synthesizer.
Yeah.
Now, this is the Moog synthesizer that had only been utilized by groups like Yes or
Stevie Wonder and Stevie
King
Wonder at that
Crimson,
time was one of the great exponents of it.
That's right. So, and it was a mono instrument. You could only play one note at a time, and you had to tune them. So there was this instrument in the studio, and I've gone at the front of the machine, the thing going on the doob, that Curly Locks bass line. I'm going, right, and at that time, I'm showing off to Robbie Shakespeare, who's in the studio. And I'm going, Robbie, you ever see one of this at Jamaica? Right, and then I overdub another line that goes wah 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 wah, caught you in a lie, wah 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 wah, right, to bolster the backing vocal chorus, right. Well, after that, Lloydie Coxon, who had boasted that he didn't play English reggae upon his own, only play pre-release and strictly dubwise from Jamaica. That was his motto, and that was his phrase. There he was, playing that song on his sound system, in some way eating humble pie. But people didn't accredit any of that to me. And I'm the bass player, I'm the guitarist, I'm the synthesizer, I'm the pianist, right? And I'm playing organ. And Louise is singing, and Houghton's playing drums, right? The notoriety of that song, how popular it became in a short space of time, taught me a lesson. It was like, them man, they can't do that for themselves, right? Because I never know Lloydie Coxon to play no bass or guitar, but his name's on the record, producer. And He was the executive producer. He paid for all of that, right? I'm the musical producer. I played all of that. He paid, I played, right? And so it taught me a lesson. I thought, Dennis, you better not do this for anyone except you're doing it for yourself. But then Castro Brown comes along and goes, hey, me here, what are you doing now? I said, yeah. And Castro, his mom and my parents have been long friends since the 50s. In fact, there was a time when my parents, before they bought their own house, when they were tenants in Castro Brown's mum's house in Putney, right? And this was before I arrived. So he knew who I was because he knew my parents. So Castro Brown comes along to me and he goes, right, you're going to make some records with me. I go, am I? He goes, yeah. I've got a group. I go, all right, let's hear it. He's going, but they haven't got a name. What do you mean, no name? How are they called? And he goes, 15, 16, 17. I go, 15, 16, 17. I like it. But why 15, 16, 17? He's going, because one of them is 15, one of them is 16, and the other one is 17. That's their age. And it was novel. And he's come with this tune, the Christine, the lead singer, she's come with this tune. Black skin boys are the better black skin boys. Oh, yes. Of course, I'm having a piece of that. And I've gone into the studio, this time with a drummer called Jabunny, who was the drummer from Rico Undivided and then Monday, right? A different style of drummer, right? And I've gone into the studio with him, and I've repeated, he's drumming, I'm playing all the other instruments, and the girls are singing. And that song rose to the hill. Dennis Brown had released it on his Deb label, right? So therefore, I was more than capable and able of making this new beat that we were about to pronounce Lovers Rock. Because, a lot of people in London had recording. They didn't have my sound, but they had been recording. And Count Shelley, most notably, had recorded Ginger Williams, a song called Tenderly.
Oh, I know the song.
You touch my hand, na 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 na. Yeah, and he'd recorded Gene Rondo. Gene Rondo had lots of hits. He was the Rasta crooner, and he's no longer with us. But one of his songs was, "Oh, sweet Africa, land of my forefather." A tune which I very much idolized and loved and versioned it myself later on. And Prisoner of Love. How lonesome night you'll find me. I am the chains that bind me. I'm a prisoner of love. He was like, oh. He was the reggae Nat King Cole.
Yeah.
And so those people were making reggae that was recorded in London, but it was not being called Lovers Rock. Only when Louisa Mark had done that and Marie Pierre had done a song called Walk Away, and then John Kapai, my great friend and most talented man, who plays every instrument just like I do. So him and I together were like an orchestra. Yeah. And an old friend, Dennis Harris, who had lots of record labels and who had been involved with groups like the Pioneers and groups like that. And he'd also been involved with Susan Cadogan's hit, Hurt So Good, because him and Lee Scratch Perry were very close friends. And he had put that out on his label before it was re-released on Magnet and went into the charts. And he had sold up his grocer shop in Brockley, his mini mart, and decided to buy a premises 2 doors or 3 doors away where it had a basement where he could build a recording studio and do his record business. And then came to me and said, with a bunch of keys, and said, these are the keys to the studio for you. This is your studio. You could do whatever you like in there. Just make sure I get an album out of it every month, right? And upstairs, there's a room where if you get too tired,
go and sleep.
You don't have to go home. Go upstairs and sleep and wake up in the morning. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, he didn't ask me. He told me as an elder man. Now, I'd met this man because Matumbi, my group, had been employed to be the entertainment for one of his excursions. He used to do a lot of excursions where a coach leave from Brixton Town Hall, a coach leave from Ealing Town Hall, and all converge
on Seesaw.
Yes. In this case, it was on a town in northern Wales. Right. I forget where, but it was in northern Wales, and Matumbi, clever as we thought, Wales, down to Bristol, cross the channel. And then we discovered we got to drive all the way through Wales up and down those hills. So we arrived, a bit late for the show, went and did the show, and then nobody had the gall to go to the guy we weren't paying. Yeah. We were just glad that he let us play. Right, so some weeks later he calls me up and goes, I don't want no money. I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, nobody no come. I go, what? I'm coming for that. And so from there on, him and I became, reasonable friends. So when he built the studio, wanted me to be the engineer. And one night, whilst I was playing some guitar, he said, man, I like the way you play guitar, It's going, look, you play bass good, but your guitar playing ain't up to it. I went, what do you mean? It's going, I know someone who will wipe the floor with you playing guitar. So, yeah, bring him, And he brings the guy. And it's some guy called John Kapai. Now, John is of mixed heritage. His father's Nigerian, his mother's Welsh, right? But you couldn't meet more of a gentleman and a great musician. And in fact, he was involved with a group called The Cats in 1968, that ska version of Swan Lake. Ding, 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 ding. That actually featured in the British charts.
Yes.
So I knew the group, and then here I was meeting one of the group, the guitar player. When he plugged his guitar in and started playing, I thought, then...
Yeah. I best put mine down.
Play. So I said to him, hey, what? Me and you form a group now. I'll play bass, you play guitar. That was in 1975. I'd been a fan of the Beatles for a long time.
Right.
And I've been reading where Sir George had been talking about them making loops. And so I decided I could make loops as well. And one afternoon in the studio to demonstrate how to make a loop, reggae was just beginning to issue versions on the other side of the tune. And a most popular tune at number one at the time was Young, Gifted and Black.
Bob and Marcia.
So I helped myself to a few bars from the recording on the other side, linked them together, and then got a member of the staff to play trombone and flute and make a dub version of Guantanamera. Now, that tune, when I cut the dub plate, I took it to a dance one night, a sound system called Jim Daddy, and I invited him to play again, to play this. So he put it on and went, yeah, my wicked. I'll get £3 for it.
Which is a lot of money back then, yeah.
So I thought, I can't turn this £3 down. I took the £3 and gave him the record. And out of that £3, we drank alcohol and got a taxi home.
Right.
That was the start of being called Blackbeard because
the pirate.
People thought it was piracy, and I was going, I'm not pirating the tune. I'm just, showing my skills about how to borrow.
Yeah. I wanted to go back and talk to you about the Louisa Marks thing because it's a seminal moment in your career.
Absolutely.
but it's also a seminal moment in black British culture and black music.
Yes.
When you were making that, or when you finished it and you saw the reaction, did you realise what you'd done at the time?
Well, I had hoped it to be as around as long as it has been, and I hoped to gain notoriety at being a bass player, guitarist, a multi-instrumentalist, right? And in some way, people would call on me to do that. And I realized later on that I was actually short-selling myself because I'm doing the work of 5 or 6 people, right? But getting paid
only for one.
And that for me was, at least I've got a job, I'm working, But then after a while, I stopped doing that for other people other than myself. And that was when I recorded Silly Games. I had this drum pattern in my head that I wanted to get a real drummer to play. And I tried it out on a few, but none of them really came up to the expectation of what I expected from this beat that was going through my head. And I could mouth beat it, but to play it on the drums, right, was quite difficult. I could play it for, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but to play it for 3 minutes constant, right, was a bit of a bother. So I went to Drummy Zeb, the drummer of Aswad.
Aswad, yeah, I know Drummy.
I said, Drummy, listen to this beat. You think you can play it? And he was like, oh, you mean? When he first started playing, he thought, why? He was like, why didn't I think of this again? Because he's not me. Right? And he got on it and he varied it and I'm going, yeah, you understand what it is that I want. Let's go into the studio. So we go into the studio and I'm playing the bass and I'm the sound engineer. And I'm teaching him the tune. Janet doesn't know the tune yet. Janet's not involved yet. And I'm saying to her, well, when the bass goes do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do, that is the verse. When it goes dum, do-do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do, dum, 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 that's the chorus, right? He understood. And I couldn't talk whilst I'm playing. So I go, right, this is it. And this is verse 1, verse 2, and then the chorus is out. And after 2 takes,
he was in it.
He was in it. He was in it to the tune of where, at the end of the song where it goes, to play your silly game, right, on that bit, right, I just wanted the drums to be steady there. He's going, I'm thinking, that's rock. But I like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so my idea was to create a whole heap of tunes with that drum beat.
Right.
But due to the success of that one tune, I daren't do it again because it'd be like, that's all him can do. Now, if I was in Jamaica, I would have sharked on that beat and played it 100 times with lots of different artists, everybody using, that'd be the new thing.
Yeah.
Right, but, in England, you do one, and then that's a one-off, and then you carry on, you try and make something else. And then, once we'd finished the rhythm track, I invited Janet to sing.
I mean, that vocal is iconic.
Mate, I'm telling you.
Yeah, and of course, everybody tries it, and no one can reach that note, because that's clearly, one of the signature moments in that song.
Yeah, and in reggae in the UK.
100%. Which was where I wanted to go to next, because I'm really interested in finding out who was the person that coined the phrase "lovers rock," because there was no genre. It was something that was created from a piece of from music that you made.
Persons coined that phrase,
right?
Because on the sound systems in that time, the mic announcer would be announcing the next tune or the next style. This is rockers, or this, and then the term came, lovers rock. Now that would be telling the audience, this is a tune that you've got to dance to together.
Yeah.
Right? Find yourself a partner. This is lovers rock, right? And the mic person on my sound at the time, a youth called Pebbles, was quite famous for saying that. So when speaking to Dennis Harris about what was new in the dance, because I straddled both genres in the sound system and in the group world, and I would, we would talk about what was popular in the dance. For instance, there was a statement at one time when the mic man would say, "Oh, sir," and then if the audience replied, "Go there," it would be licensed to play that tune and any other version of that tune for the next half hour, And so I told him about that. So he said, "That's the title of your first album then. Who said go there?" And I'd constructed a group that was given the name the Fourth Street Orchestra for the purposes of misleading people as to where it was recorded. Because I wanted to bust this myth that reggae couldn't be made in England, And so we put out a section of records there. Then once John Kapai had written a song called "I'm in Love with the Dreadlocks." Okay.
Big tune.
Now, he had written that tune in answer to Curly Locks. I had dabbled with a bit of Curly Locks for my Louisa Mark thing. Louisa Mark was before Brown Sugar, but there was this iconic song, "I'm in Love with the Dreadlocks." Now, I remember one night when Coffee was singing this tune, she said, "In the day, you could bring home a white man, an Indian man, a Chinese man, but don't bring home a dreadlocks. Your parents now are like that." And I thought, you know what? That was true. As soon as a man grew dreadlocks, right, he was frowned upon and deemed as a dropout, and a no good somebody, So John written this tune, "I'm in Love with," the girl is saying, "I'm in love with the dreadlocks. And I never felt this way before," right? And so in the talk about how this song should be marketed, I told Dennis, you know what the new statement in dance is? What? "Lovers rock." And he went, "Yeah, I like that," and took his pen out and drew a heart with a Cupid thing and went, "See the label there?" And before you knew it, "I'm in Love with the Dreadlocks" was released on the Lovers Rock label.
I saw that label again for the first time in maybe 30 years last night. Mm-hmm. And it brought back so many memories.
Yeah, man.
So many memories.
Because that was the label and the pronouncement that the genre was to be called Lovers Rock. And it hadn't been called Lovers Rock before. It had been, hinted at in the dance by the DJs and that, because, the new phrase going around. But to actually cement it and have a label called Lovers Rock, giving rise to it being a genre, Dennis Harris did that. And John Kapai with Brown Sugar.
Thinking back on it now, when you you're in the studio, you've made these two statement records some years apart. Do you think that Lovers Rock could have been made or created anywhere other than the UK, or was it a collision of sounds and cultures? And
it was definitely a collusion of sounds and cultures. I don't think anywhere else in the world could have made a soup like that. Everybody makes soup and with the same ingredients even, but they taste different.
Yeah.
Right, and so Lovers Rock reflects the lives of mainly young girls in the UK. In fact, in the instance of "I'm in Love with the Dreadlocks," for a young girl to be proclaiming her love for the dreadlocks, right, was kind of like, all right,
yeah,
and then for a young girl to be proclaiming that she saw the look in that guy's eye, and we had the same kind of look, and we must be meant to be for each other, and don't play any silly games. Let's don't just look at each other from afar. Come closer, let me touch you. kind of idea. And nowadays I've realized that a lot of people have misconstrued the opening line. The opening line of Silly Games is, "I've been wanting you for so long, it's a shame." But a lot of people have taken to singing, "I've been watching you." And I often say to them, that's too pervious. I mean, my sisters would never forgive me for writing, "I've been watching you." Watching what? No, watch what? What are you watching?
Thinking back on that now as well, how does creating that genre feel, and knowing that it's travelled around the world and it's been accepted around the world by everybody, even back at home,
Right.
which is the actual acid test for what you do.
It was exactly what I imagined for that tune. And when it came, the feeling was tremendous. You know, a reggae tune that I played all the instruments on, that I produced, that I engineered, right, is at the top of the charts.
But not just at the top of the charts. I mean, that sound is, and I hate to use the phrase "coals to Newcastle," but it's probably the only thing I think of right now. Being able to be sent back to JA, being back to Barbados, all the places that I thought, you know what, the music that we've loved for so long
Right.
has always come the other way. Now we're sending something back, which is very
Absolutely.
much ours, but also we're playing the same game as they are.
Yeah.
The music is of an equal quality, which in some
We're
cases
selling back to them what they sold to us.
yeah, which in some cases hadn't been the case before. I mean, that
Yeah.
must have been for you an
Oh
incredible.
yeah, because my father once said that unless I made it in the music business, I'd never be able to afford a decent meal in a decent restaurant. Right. So now I take pictures of all the food I'm eating and send it to him.
So that's a bit harsh, Dad. Come on.
It's going, "Dad, look, here I am. I'm at the Ritz now.
Yeah.
See the menu?"
Yeah.
You know, and so that with that in the back of my mind, I kind of decided that I would indulge in music, not only reggae, but other music which I loved and could play and had the knowledge of. So one day, some youngsters contacted me, and they had been reading that I had been a Jimi Hendrix fan and that I loved loud guitars, and they were a punk band making their first album. And this group was called the Pop Group. And I thought, oh, that's a novel name, the Pop Group. And it was sort of reminiscent of Bob Dylan's group, The Band,
Yes.
you know. And so I said, yeah. And they had this tune, it's called Beyond Good and Evil. And I went into the studio and we did the single, Beyond Good and Evil, and we didn't have another tune ready. So it was suggested that turn the master tape over backwards and then play a new drum track on it. And the other day I listened to that tune, it's called 338, and I had given the drummer the Silly Games pattern, and he's playing that on a punk tune going backwards, right? And that group,
Mad.
yeah, it was definitely one of my wildest, things to be involved with. And then they wanted to do an album, and I spent a few months in a studio in Dorking, a studio called Ridge Farm, where there was some equipment belonging to John from the group, yes.
John Anderson.
And a guy called Mike, I forget his surname. Mike was the engineer at a studio called Advision, where they made all the TV ads and did the sound to that. And he was also in charge of John's equipment, which, yes, were on tour, and this equipment was just there in boxes. So he decided to put a studio together in the barn of a friend of his in Capel in Surrey, which is next, down Horsham, down that way. And the first person to use that studio were Brian Ferry and that lot.
Roxy
Roxy
Music.
They made an album in there and it sounded proper. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to use this studio. So we used that studio to make the Pop Group album. And then on the heels of the Pop Group album, I was contacted by Chris Blackwell, who said he just signed the first female all-female punk band, and would I be interested in producing? So I said, yeah. And that group turned out to be a group called The Slits. And that was their debut album. So by then, I'd made my mark in the sort of non-reggae world as a producer. And I'd produced the first recordings of Steel Pulse, and Linton Kwesi Johnson, whom I met at the Four Aces, Linton.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Matumbi had been given a sort of residency, or at least once every 2 months gig at the Four Aces on a Sunday night, where groups that played on a Sunday night were famously booed off the stage after 3 or 4 songs. Because the audience weren't particularly into live music.
Just give them the tunes they want, yeah.
Sound system. So being affiliated with the sound system, I took the opportunity to learn all the latest Dennis Brown, the latest Gregory Isaacs, the latest Burning Spear, all the artists that were popular
tunes,
on, John Holt, all the artists that were popular on the sound systems. But groups tended to play much older reggae, and knew what was current. So we learned all those tunes, and when we went up there on the Sunday night, we'd drop those tunes, and also we learned how to do dub from the stage. Tank, 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 tank with the guitar and stay in time and come back like a dub record.
Yeah, so you're just doing an extended version, you run an extended
sound system, yeah. So people quite warm to that. They never clapped, but most importantly, they never booed.
Yeah.
So Linton came now to interview us about that, because he was then a reporter and working for the BBC World Service. And when he came, the group said, "You better talk to him, Dennis." So I was designated the spokesperson. Yeah. And whilst we talked about it, and at the end of us talking, this interview went, I want to try and put some music to my poetry. And my friend Vivian Weathers tells me that if I'm going to do that, I've got to do it with you, because you know how to capture the reggae sound. So I was like, okay. Then about 2 years later, he calls me up and said, right, remember that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said you was going to help me. Yeah, I got some time in the studio this weekend.
Let's go.
Absolutely. We went into the studio that weekend and came out on the other side on the Monday morning with Poet and the Roots, Dread, Beat and Blood. Right? That was his first
album, yeah.
Yeah. And since then, we've toured the world, him and me, I even came out of retirement, because once Matumbi had sort of ended for me, I was I built a recording studio. I was working primarily in my own studio, and I had no time to go out touring. My first customer in my studio, Studio 80, was a man called Ruichi Sakamoto from Japan.
Who sadly passed recently.
I know, yes. Rest in peace, Ru. In fact, Don Letts had been in Japan with The Clash and had met Ru, who he came back and said to me, Sakamoto wants your telephone number. And I was going, yeah, give it to him. He's going, oh, good, because I already did. Okay. And then Ru called up and decided that we were going to use my studio. I go, but my studio's not being finished built yet. And he went, well, that's it. I want to use it before you do. And I thought, that's a strange request. A man calling me from Japan saying he wants to use he wants to be the first person to use my studio. And then he says, I've got some equipment over in Germany. I'll send it over to you, right? And we're like, this is a hoax. The guy's living in Japan and he's going to send me equipment from Germany. I'm going, this is a wind-up, right? But then an Arctic arrived outside the studio, looking for a guy called Dennis Bovell to sign for all this equipment that was coming from Germany.
Amazing.
And then I realised he'd been working in Kraftwerk's studio in Germany. And the equipment that he had over there, he's going to send it to London so that when he came to London, we could use it in my studio. And then I thought, this is real. And then I had to go to Sir George Martin and borrow or rent 24 tracks of Dolby's, because I wanted to run the session at 30 IPS, and I needed some noise reduction.
So for those who don't know, let's kind of dive into the technical thing and just give them a little bit more insight into that.
30 IPS is the speed that the tape ran at 30 inches per second. And it's so fast and that it leaves a shh as it's going by the playhead. So to quell that shh, which is noise, to reduce that noise, there's systems that have been invented called Dolby. And they're usually on 2 tracks, but to have Dolby on every track of a 24 track is quite an expensive venture. But it saves you that noise of the shh, going around in the background as you're recording, because it can cancel that out, right? So I had to borrow some from Air Studios, which I did. And Ruth came over, and he brought with him a Prophet 10. Now, we'd seen in this country from sequential circuits an instrument called a Prophet 5, but we'd not seen the Prophet 10, which was a double manual Prophet. And he brought that, and I was like in awe. And we started to record with it, and he recorded the drums, the bass, just like I would do normally if I'm playing all myself. But he was playing all himself from a digital point of view, from samples on a keyboard. And one of the songs we recorded is a song called Riot in Lagos. Now, that song rose to popularity because there's a DJ on Radio 1. He hammered that track.
Yeah.
And lots of DJs would meet me and go, what, you did that in 1980? And recently they re-released that album, and the album's called B2 Unit, and it was, I didn't know then, but it was Japan's first electronic dub album, and given the work that Ruchi had done with Yellow Magic, this was just an extension and into reggae, the dub phenomenon, and he wanted me to do it. And I was quite honored that he'd chosen me, because when I went to Japan the first time, on the strength of having worked with him, people were bowing down.
Yeah. I can imagine. But it's a strange transfer from, well, not a strange transfer. I mean, why
it's a different world.
But yeah, it's a different world. Thank you. Moving from that world that you're very comfortable in, that you know really well, into a world of punk and guitars and electronica that may not have been as familiar to you. I mean, how do you walk into that first off? Is it a challenge?
Well,
how do you meet the expectation of the artist on the other side?
Before I met Ruchi, I'd been a fan of Yellow Magic Orchestra. In fact, Chris Blackwell once gave me an album of Yellow Magic Orchestra and said, tell me what you think of this. And I loved it. And the Space Invaders tune.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say computer games. Obviously there was people. It's funny you mention that, because that tune amongst the black club crowd and black people in general, because of that bass line, because it was one of the things people were like, yeah, I get it, and it was the first electronica thing I heard. So big tune, big tune.
So for me to be meeting the guy who created that, and for him to be wanting me to do dub on his new solo album, listen, it was a challenge that I rose to.
And the slits, and I mean, obviously, again, guitars, and I mean, I read somewhere that Chris said he wanted it clean, but probably not too clean because it's punk. I mean, there's that thing about how do I kind of keep the edge, but also bring it into a world that's going to be mainstream, which is where you.
Well, I gave it the reggae treatment, where the drums were heavy and loud in front, the bass, but the guitars were so girly that I had to kind of not beef them up, but spread them out with effects, And Viv Albertine, In fact, once we were in the studio and she wanted to play an acoustic guitar. She was taking rather long about it. So I said, give me the guitar. And I went into the studio and I played something on the acoustic guitar. I was like, it needs to be like this. And everybody's going, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then she starts crying. And I'm like, what's wrong with you, lah? She's going, no one's ever going to believe that I played that. And I saw it. And I said, rub it off. And everyone's going, no, that's what I said, erase. And so it was erased, and I said to her, go in there and do as close to what I did with your ability and see if that makes you happy. And she went in, did whatever it was she did, and everybody thought, yeah, that's good. And it was great. And she's often thanked me for not forcing my musicality on the slits.
And Linton clearly is our poet.
Yes.
He's our messenger.
The laureate.
Yeah, and through the 70s, through the 80s, he was the guy who was the clarion call.
Absolutely.
And told people how it was.
One of the points of, the high points of recording with Linton was that he'd written a poem about a man called Blair Peach.
Yes.
Now, I was like one of the people who said to him, what's the death of Blair Peach got to do with us as black people in this country? He calmly said to me, that man came from New Zealand on an anti-fascist march in Southall and ended up losing his life. It should be noted that black people, right, should appreciate that he was so much in our corner that it cost him his life. And I thought, Linton, yeah. But then when he was going, everywhere me go, me hear people say, everywhere me go is the talk of the dead at the SPG, them a murderer. Murderer, we can't make them get no furtherer. The SPG, them a murderer. Murderer, we can't make them get no furtherer. So I was like, Linton, you're taking on the might of the paramilitary, right? Them guys don't play, no. Them killed Blair Peach, and he was a white guy. You, they're going to come around your house, kick your door in, accuse you of something that you didn't do, and justify killing you. So he's going, hang on a minute, I'm not saying that they are. I'm saying I hear people saying that, and I'm wondering if it's true. So it's like,
clever, yeah.
Very clever, my man. Because it became apparent to me that that's what he was saying. He said, everywhere me go, me hear people say. Right? He's not saying...
I'm saying...
I'm hearing people saying, and I'm wondering that if it's true. SPG, right? So I said, do me a favor. Don't put my name on that record. He went, you're joking. We did it, and we must take the credit for it again. Trembling as I was, I was thinking, SPG is going to stop me on the road now and go, who's your name? Dennis Bovell. You work with that guy, Linton. We were looking for it. Yeah. Well, we got you.
You'll do. And obviously, Linton's, for me, other great thing is his commentary on the Deptford fire.
His stance, absolutely. I mean, yeah, he was adamant that it was an incendiary device that was thrown into that party, and people had witnessed a car driving by and throwing something, all that. But he was appalled by the fact that after 13 young black children had lost their lives in a fire, there were no messages of condolence from the palace. Yeah. For instance, I mean, if that had been 13 white children, it would have been, the Queen would have gone and visited the spot and, or the Prime Minister or something, right? But, I mean, I did another song called 13 Dead and Nothing Said with Karen Wheeler, who happened to be a friend of the sister of the girl whose party it was. And it was called 17, it was 17 of January 81. You know, Karen Wheeler was singing that, and she was a friend of the family. It was an awful event, you know, and still no one's been brought to book for it.
No, I don't like to, but say that is why Linton and the work you've done with Linton is so important, because it chronicles a period of history.
Absolutely.
It speaks of Black British culture. It speaks of our experience. Looking back, it's 50-odd years. You've worked with some incredible artists. Mm-hmm. You've made some unbelievable records. You've created an entire genre that the world knows about that didn't exist before, which is a thing in itself.
Yep.
Did the little boy that came from Barbados at 12 think that this was ever going to be his path? Was that...
Well, the little boy that came from Barbados made that his path. He walked through the forest with a machete, right? And mashed it all the way through. In every genre that I had to go in, I managed to have some success.
But your thing was always about whatever situation I put myself in, I'm going to make this work for me. This is that kind of sense of pushing through.
I'm going to make myself proud of it.
Yeah.
And if I'm proud of it, I'll argue with anyone how good it is.
And this is really difficult, and I have no idea whether you can answer this, Dennis. But if you were to choose 3 tracks from your career that you kind of go, you know what, I might set these above anything else, would you be able to do that?
Possibly. I think Louisa Mark, most definitely. That was the beginning of me being launched into the music world, and people kind of recognizing that I was capable of doing anything. There's that. And then I think Silly Games, for certain. Then I would have to say Viola Wells, you know, Get Along With That, you know, and all that. But the album I made with Joss Stone stands out, you know, above a lot of things.
You've been more than generous with your time. I can't, again, I will say it's genuinely an honour to meet you, because, you know, your music has been the soundtrack to my life, my sister's life, my mum's life, sadly no longer with us at parties, you know, my wife, and many friends that have kind of danced, enjoyed, you know, you've provided memories and great moments, and you've provided a culture and a sound that Black Britain and British people can be incredibly proud of. So, Dennis Bovell, MBE, thank you very, very much for being a part of this Google series, the Black British producers behind global albums.
Okay.
We really appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.